I'll just dive right into it. An Igbo proverb tells us that a man who does not know where the rain began to beat him cannot say where he dried his body. So where do you think, Prof, that the rain started beating us as Africans?
First of all, let us understand that that question can have many answers. It can have many answers because one can go down to slavery and say we were enslaved. But remember, we are not the only peoples in history who have been enslaved. One can go down to colonization. And one can also recognize that we were not the only people who are colonized. One can blame the neo-colonial project, and one will also acknowledge that neo-colonialism is also rampant in other parts of the world. And now that you started with the proverbs, there is a Chinese proverb which says that he who blames others will never get far, and he who blames himself is halfway the journey, and he who blames nobody has arrived. There is a sense, therefore, in which we have been victims of many diabolical machinations of other civilizations. The Arabs came here and ravaged us. The Europeans in all their diversity, the Belgians, the French, the English, the Scottish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Italians, all came here and did impact us very negatively. But then I remember that as early as 1906, the great South African Pixley Kaisa Kaseme was talking about the regeneration of Africa. And he was telling us that it is largely our duty to make Africa great again. So in answer to your question, the rain started beating us a long time ago. But since we started regaining independence from the colonialists, we have had sufficient time to deal with our problems, and we have not done a good job of it. The men and women who have been entrusted with political power and office have become dead gods. They have abused and misused their offices for personal gain to the detriment of the people of the continent, largely so. Because you must also remember that Africa is diverse. And there are a number of countries in the African continent which are doing reasonably well and have been doing well and have surmounted difficulties in the recent past. If you go to Botswana, there are things that are happening that are worth writing home about. If you go to Rwanda now, the genocide notwithstanding, there are things that are worth writing home about. In other words, we know all we ought to know in order to acknowledge and to recognize where the rain started beating us. It depends on where we choose and what kind of rain we want to assign to our wetness or assign our wetness to. And it is also easy to blame others and ignore that we are co-authors of our own misfortune. A long answer to a short question, but necessary because of the history of it.
I appreciate that. So now that I like the Chinese proverb you gave where you said that a man that blames himself has arrived.
Has covered half the journey.
Has covered half the journey.
Yes.
And which man has arrived?
And he who blames nobody has arrived.
He who blames nobody has arrived.
Yes.
So when do you think, what do you attribute to our inability to not blame anybody? Do you attribute this to leadership, or is it other forces that we can, you know?
It depends, really, because writing in 1983, Nigeria's Chinua Achebe writes the little book, The Trouble with Nigeria. And I've always taken the view that that book could very well have been titled The Trouble with Africa. And Chinua takes the view that the trouble with Nigeria, and in my view, by extension, the trouble with Africa, is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. So that leadership takes the lion's share of the blame, because history has demonstrated consistently that when you have men and women who have been entrusted with power and they use it well, then societies grow by leaps and bounds. And if you look at Africa now, and you look at Africa since the 1960s, and look at the conduct of the men and women that have occupied political office, they have dealt a big negative blow to the continent of Africa, and they are largely responsible for our plight, whether it is economically, whether it is politically or socially. But there is also a sense in which you must blame the people. History has also demonstrated, if you look at other civilizations, including in Africa, that when the people are aware and when the people recognize their rights, then they can rise. You and me have seen this in the recent past with the Arab Spring, which started in Tunisia, how young men and women rose up and overthrew governments that were conducting themselves in a manner that was detrimental to societies. You and me have in the past seen in Sudan, the people rise and remove a dictator who had refused to move out of office for 36 years. You and me have witnessed in the recent past the people of Mali rise up. And you and me, courtesy of history, know what happened in South Africa in Sharpeville massacre. You and me have seen what happened in Soweto in 1976. The people too must rise. When the people are docile, then those we call leaders, for want of a better term, abuse them to their own detriment. So in this game, we blame both the windmill to mean the leaders and the wind to mean the people. And in the countries where you see democracy thriving and people's rights being respected and the circumstances that the people are taken care of, it is a combination of both good leadership and a followership that makes demands. Go to countries such as Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and look at the quality of life. When they talk about free education, it is free indeed. When they talk about free health services, it is free indeed. When they talk about services, they are quality services. If you go to countries such as Singapore, and even within the continent of Africa, smaller countries such as Mauritius, such as the Seychelles, Botswana, I've talked about, and even Rwanda, the quality of leadership and population that is awake to their rights. But leadership is Africa's greatest problem. Monsters masquerading as leaders is who we have in most parts of the continent.
But it's in these leaders' best interests to maintain the status quo and have a people that will not rise up. So ultimately, can we say then it's up to the wind, as you said? It's up to the wind to enact that change and not wait for the windmill to do anything about it, to change the status quo.
Yes, it is. When the people become aware There is a book that I am rereading again, is written, is about the former Soviet Union, is called Darkness at Noon by Arthur Koestler. And one of the statements that he makes, which I find favor with, and which I want to anchor my answer on, is that the level of democracy is dependent on the political maturity of the masses. And that when the masses are politically immature, and this is now my paraphrase, then they are susceptible to manipulation. And you see this in Africa. You see how in different countries of Africa, the people are manipulated through different ways. They are manipulated through ethnicity. The leaders weaponize people from the group and tell them it is in our best interest to produce a president. The presidency then becomes the trophy, and everybody in those communities can kill in order to have one of their own as the president. And we have seen this in a number of countries in the continent of Africa. Then if they have if they don't use ethnicity, they use money, because corruption has now become rampant, and politics has become an industry. One of the shortest avenues to ill-gotten wealth in Africa is through the political avenue. You get there and you begin to grab without consequence, and every other African country, with the exception of very few, produces millionaires who have no industry. They're just stealing and reaping from their countries to the detriment of the people. What then can we do in order to change this? My own view is that the people must recognize that they have a duty to salvage themselves. The people must liberate themselves from this mental slavery. And you'll find many of these leaders, how they capture the people's imagination. They'll say in many African countries, we fought for you. We sacrificed for you. We were detained for you. This is called the Martin Luther King Jr. used to call it the martyr complex. People who, in order to attract the sympathy of the people and to gain political office, will always refer to their suffering. I was detained. I did this. I was in the bush. And you see it in a number of African countries. And in that way, they have a sense of entitlement, and they do things that are not in the best interest of the country. It is in the best interest of the people to organize and to rise up against such people. You are now beginning to see a trend in Africa, starting in the Sahel, where the people are beginning to conquer fear. The younger population is beginning to conquer fear. And you saw it in Mali, you saw it in Chad, you saw it recently in the last few days in Guinea-Conakry, and the army once again is beginning to ride the horse of liberation, so to speak, because the people have now recognized that the ballot can always be manipulated. And when it is manipulated, you have semblances of elections which produces the same kind of people, because they have money. They have made money a mandatory requirement in electoral process. Therefore, you can never beat them, and the good men and women can never rise. So in a short sense, I am saying that it is the duty of the people to rise up. When people rise up, then these demigods will disappear. These demigods who suffer from what I've called elsewhere the Jehovah or the God complex, these are the greatest danger to African societies. And Julius Kambarage Nyerere used to say it very well, that when people who claim or seek political office have become bankrupt of ideas, then they talk about religion, they talk about tribe, and they use money to ascend to political office, and such individuals can never change societies positively.
You talked about fear, and this brings to mind culturally, as Africans, we're raised to revere our elders, not to question, to keep our mouths shut. And so even from our homes, from the time we're born up until the time we even leave home, and even after that, we're not encouraged to speak up, especially against our elders. Could this have something to do with the way we also approach these demigods in politics?
There's a sense in which you are right, but let us go back in history and ask ourselves, the elders you revered were elders who are worthy of reverence. They were elders who took care of your affairs. If they were in society and there were disputes, they were judges and fair judges. If there was land distribution, they did it fairly. They were not using their positions for purposes of oppressing the people. And if they did, people revolted against them. Now, you hear individuals who have gone into political office calling themselves honorable. I don't call them honorable unless I am convinced that they engage in honorable conduct. You hear people calling themselves excellencies, and there is nothing excellent about them. So I think that we've got to understand where we are coming from and appreciate that many of the men and women that we now call elders do not deserve respect, because respect is reciprocal, and respect does not emanate from the office that you hold. It is a product of your conduct over time, which conduct is beneficial to the society. And I always say this, to the extent that we are all human beings, we make mistakes, wittingly or unwittingly. The only problem and the only thing that we must never do is to persist in our foolishness. We have made mistakes as Africans by according respect to individuals who do not deserve respect, people who abuse us, people who have arrogated to themselves the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom and think that we are dunderheads. It is now the time that we stop persisting in our foolishness by allowing such individuals to thrive to our detriment. And one of the things that I think will happen to Africa if she does not change is that she will continue to be subdued by other civilizations. If you look at the history of Europe, you look at the history of Latin America, you look at the history of the Arab world, you look at the history of China, and you look at the history of societies that have grown by leaps and bounds in the recent past. They have grown because the people made demands of their leadership. You remember in 1980s, the China that we now talk about, young men and women rose up in Tiananmen Square, and they dared the establishment. They stood before military tanks and said, we want change. And from that point, China has been a juggernaut in the economic arena. And I'm suggesting to us that Africans must not allow themselves to be manipulated by the political class. If she continues to do so, and permit me to say, Damaris, if you've looked at how Africa has suffered during this COVID period, if there was any doubt that we have poor quality leaders, poor quality people in positions of leadership, COVID has demonstrated to us. We are receiving vaccines from little countries in Europe, from Latvia. We are receiving vaccines from backwater countries because we have the capacity, but we have not the leadership that will unlock that capacity, because leadership is short-termist. And you can see how people in positions of leadership, instead of using their position for the benefit of the people, are instead stealing from the people. So I'm suggesting to you, Damaris, that going forward, we must not confuse worship of idols in the form of politicians for respect, which is unearned.
Yeah, that's a great answer. You talked about a few African countries that have somehow managed to move past where the rest of us are still stuck. What did they do?
Let us look at a few of them, and I'm answering your question in relative terms, if you look at the whole continent is in a pathetic condition. But there are few countries which, even in the face of adversity, have done certain things. They are small, I know, but they are doing certain things that can be emulated. Look at Seychelles, a small country with a population of 800, but look at the quality of life there. Look at the per capita income, impressive. And what have they succeeded in doing? What they have succeeded in doing is entrusting men and women with power and ensuring that that power is exercised for their benefit. And when it's not exercised, they vote to replace such individuals. Look at Mauritius, a little island with very few natural resources, and look at our per capita income. Once again, they have allowed the system to operate in a manner that produces men and women who are responsible and answerable to the people, men and women who are innovative and inventing, and they are converting that little island into a mecca for the financial world. And that is the kind of creativity that one expects. Look at Botswana. Botswana in 1966 was a backwater country with very few things, but through successive leaders, they have succeeded in ensuring that the private sector operating in that country is capable of producing in an environment that is symbiotic, so that the quality of people's lives, whether it is in education, whether it's in health, whether it's in agriculture, is admirable. And if you look at post-genocide Rwanda under the leadership of Paul Kagame, of course, there are many who think that he is overstayed in power, but let us give credit where it is due. There is a sense in which within a span of 25 years, they have succeeded in doing certain things which countries like Kenya should have done, which countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo should have done. But Rwanda, which is landlocked or land-linked, depending on whether you want to be positive or negative, but the reality is that it does not have a seafront, is using different methods of innovation. Go to the area of agriculture, go to the area of health, go into the area of public transportation. It is innovation. And I think that those countries are doing well because the leadership is clear about the direction that they want the countries to take. John Joseph Pombe Magufuli in Tanzania during the short period that he served also demonstrated and was quite clear that utilizing our resources for our benefits was something that ought to be done if we want to have sustainable development. Of course, his life was cut short, and I hope that President Samia Suluhu will continue on that trajectory. In a nutshell, I'm saying, once again, it has taken leadership that is convicted, leadership that is selfless, leadership that identifies the people's problems, and leadership that prescribes solutions. And it has taken such leadership, they have taken the courage to mobilize the people in the right direction. And I think that that can be emulated going forward.
So tell me a little bit about your foundation, PLO Foundation, the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, let me state that this foundation was founded in 1990, barely 4 years after I'd left the University of Nairobi. And the whole idea was to give back and give meaning to the Kiswahili saying, that one does not have to be rich to help, and that one does not have to give people money to help them. One needs to share ideas with them. And what we have succeeded by God's grace in the last few years is to animate and energize young people. And I think that is the beauty of what we are doing, that we have not come with tons of money because we don't have it in the first place, but we have identified certain issues, we have said certain issues, we have done certain things which has energized young people across the continent of Africa and unlocked their potential. And I think that is the most important thing, that when you unlock a people's potential, so that they realize what they are doing, so that when you go to Liberia, the young men in Liberia are not being told by me or anybody here from Nairobi to do certain things. They say, these individuals are saying this thing, we can do it. When you go to South Africa, you find a young lady who is interested in outreach and says, this is the kind of thing that we want to do. You go to Uganda and you find somebody in the fashion industry and you say, this is what we want to do in order to bring Africa on the map. Ours, therefore, can only claim one thing, that through a program of mentorship, we have energized young men and women who are an army unto themselves and are discovering their potential, and they have succeeded in conquering self-doubt, conquering low self-esteem, conquering fear, and they are daring to go. And I say that that is what Africa needs. Africa does not need foundations from Europe and America giving us money. It does not require that we write proposals. Then we are beholden to Washington, to Paris, or to London, or to Copenhagen, or to Stockholm. We have been writing proposals for too long. We have become slaves for too long. And the foundation is saying, slavery no more. Self-conquest is the way. And in that way, these mentees are also becoming mentors, and they mentor us in return. And I think that that is a sustainable model.
Do you see a change in the mindsets of young people as time has gone by, as far as the way they approach their own continent and their identity as Africans?
Yes, I do. I travel and interact with enough young Africans to have hope and to be energized, that indeed I talk to enough people within the continent of Africa, both young men and women, and they speak with confidence. They believe that the continent is going to rise like the phoenix out of the fire of desperation, and that the continent is going to achieve. And what gladdens my heart is the recognition by these young men and women that this battle that we are fighting is an intergenerational battle, and that some of the things that we are seeking and asking for may not indeed be realized in our lifetime, but our joy lies in our recognition that we play our part, that this is a long chain, and each one of us strengthens the chain if we are strong in our own way and convicted in our own ways. I am confident. If you look at history, it tells you that sometimes it takes millennia for change to be discovered. You know, I keep on telling people that when Kotoka and his group removed the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah in 1966, all the books and anything that related to Kwame Nkrumah was banned in Ghana. It took Ignatius Kutu Acheampong in 1972 to start the restoration of Kwame Nkrumah. It is today that we are asking ourselves, this man in 1957 could see what we could not see. Today, Nkrumah is fully rehabilitated. In other words, the journey that he started, which was a journey that was timeless. And we too must remember that this journey is timeless. When you look at the struggle for African liberation, it did not start now. It started a long time ago. You can choose where to start. But when Marcus Garvey was talking about return to Africa, he was saying the same thing that we are saying today. When Williams of Trinidad and Tobago was speaking in 1945, and when the people gathered in Manchester for the first Pan-Africa, the fourth, I think, Pan-African meeting in Manchester in the United Kingdom, they were saying the same thing. When they gathered in Casablanca, Morocco in 1961, the same thing. When they gathered in 1963 in Addis Ababa, the same thing. There have been disappointments, but is it not the nature of life to disappoint people? And is it not the nature of human beings when they are convicted to rise up, even in the face of disappointment, and to reconquer their doubt and to move forward? I see hope.
I love that. And I think it just speaks back to maybe the crop of leaders that we have on this continent, if they thought that way, because it feels like they're only thinking about today and themselves. But if you think about planting seeds, a tree under whose shade you will never sit, then that would make all the difference.
Indeed, you put it very right. The men and women that we have in many countries today, particularly in the political arena, are perhaps our worst men and women in many countries of their countries, and even within their ranks, there are few good men and women, but they are too few to be impactful. And most of them then surrender to the majority. And every tree must be judged by its fruits. When I hear a leader saying we are doing a good job, I tell, but tell me, show me the fruits. If you are Kenyan and you are talking about universal health care, show me universal health care. If you are talking about free education, show me free education. If you are talking about security, show me security. And if you are talking about peace and quiet, I said, show me peace and quiet. Because where it is, the things that we talk about, for which government are constituted amongst men, are self-evident. If you go to, one of the things that I keep on talking about as I travel across Africa is now the thing we call border. These motorcycles that are now purportedly employing millions of Africans. You go to West Africa, you find them on the roads, you find them, the three-wheelers, the keke, you go to Uganda, you find them, you go to Tanzania, you find them, you go everywhere, you find them. In the 21st century, public transportation is being solved by driverless trains. Africa is organizing border. And these leaders are leaders in the 21st century. It tells you there is a disconnect. So there is a sense in which we have a problem there. But unfortunately, the men and women who have these ideas will never, ever be elected if we use the electoral system that we have. And I'm suggesting to you, therefore, that we must keep up this fight, because during my own lifetime, I've seen things being done which nobody imagined could be done, which means that things are doable. Look at this medium that you and me are using today. That courtesy of technology, we can interact. It tells you the capacity of the human mind and how beautiful and effective it can be if it is properly deployed. Let us deploy it well, and Africa will know change. Look at the innovation called M-Pesa, which as at today is being used by 50 million Africans. I can sit on my desk and transfer money to any part of the world. It can be done.
Can be done.
But men and women who know what they want for their people can achieve it. And that is what is called leadership.
So what advice, as a final question, what advice would you give to young people who are listening to you today?
Never say die. I remember this statement from Fidel Castro. When Fidel and his group removed the government of General Batista, he told his comrades that when you are fighting against oppression and against bad things, keep on banging the door. Keep on banging the door and never say die, because when you are about to say die, that is when the door is about to give in. This is what I will tell young people.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for your time and your wisdom. And yes, we will never say die, and we'll pass on the baton to future generations. Thank you very much.
God bless you and stay safe.
You too.
Thank you.